Welterweights collide in the small UFC Apex Octagon coming up this weekend. Max Griffin might be 7-7 with the promotion, but he's 4-1 in the 5-on-in, and he's looking to gatekeep the top 15 when he takes on the up-and-coming undefeated Ecuadorian prospect, Micheal Morales. Only the second Ecuadorian fighter after Chito Vera to make that UFC debut. And Morales, already 2-0. But it's been about a year since we last saw him. Wins over Adam Fugate as well as Trevin Giles for Morales, who beat Nikolai Varentetnikov over on Dana White's Contender Series, utilizing some really good takedowns on that one. And we talked about it. Morales coming into the UFC was known less for striking than he was for his grappling, a national champ in wrestling in Ecuador. His parents, both martial artists. His mom over on his Instagram, still competing for jiu-jitsu belts and jiu-jitsu tournaments,
Very
I guess.
impressive.
So cool to see for Morales, who trains out of Entram Gym with some of the best in the world, and a short way from Tijuana to Vegas. Same can be said for Max Griffin, going from California down to Vegas. But for Max Griffin, one of those interesting guys, because really well known on the regional scene in the States. He fought Chidi and Joe Kawani years ago when he was the Tachi Palace champ at welterweight. And I'll throw that one up there. Cinco de Mayhem.
Wild.
That punched the ticket for a 26-year-old sultry voice, Chidi and Joe Kawani, to go on a run with Bellator, to then win and fight Andre Korchkov to a loss. But if you look at it for Max Griffin, a bit of a rocky road coming into the UFC, or when he came into the UFC. He debuted when Nate Diaz fought Conor McGregor the second time at UFC 202 against Colby Covington. And for Griffin, even in the losses, you look at his fight against Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, where he drops him a couple of times.
That's one of the greatest fights of all time that nobody ever talks about.
The thing in my mind's eye, Max Griffin gets put on skates in some of his fights. But if you look at the knockdown ratio, 8-4 to 1 against, Max Griffin doesn't go down. He stays up, and he just continues to bite down on the mouthpiece. So I looked a lot into that Griffin fight that he had against Zaleski. Even though he dropped him at points, he got completely outpointed. He got rocked in the first round multiple points. So if you do watch a Griffin fight, what does he do well? Doesn't throw any kicks. Kind of has a weird stance to him. Throws a nice jab, a nice right cross, and he just continues to march and march and march. And Max Griffin, good takedown defense and good offensive takedowns too on him. That's why he makes for a tough test outside of the top 15 for Micheal Morales.
And that's why it's the perfect test for Micheal Morales at this stage of his career, because we're all kind of waiting for Morales to have that one big test at the UFC level. And I do think Max Griffin...
If you haven't watched Morales' two UFC fights, he's been tested the whole time.
I understand, but against a guy like Max Griffin, who, like you say, gatekeeps the top 15, when you beat Max Griffin, what happens to you? Only phenomenal things. And the thing about Griffin is, I feel like a Max Kellerman every time I talk about him. When Kellerman used to talk about Tom Brady, remember the cliff theory? He was like, he's gonna fall off a cliff, and then Tom Brady would just go and win another Super Bowl. I feel like every fight for Max Griffin, since I do predict, hey, he's a great boxer, but we've seen him get hit, we see him get hurt. When is that chin finally going to evade him? When is he going to fall into that kind of Matt Brown category of his career? Because he's 37 years old. He's not a young 37 with the amount of tough fights he's been through. But like you say, he's got a bend but don't break kind of chin to him. I just worry that in a matchup like this, if he does go in with his hands down, if he's not able to move forward in the matchup, and that's why I think the big thing with Max Griffin is, when he moves forward, he can threaten with his own takedown and implement his own boxing. When he's the guy getting backed up, it does kind of eliminate the wrestling from his own game.
And it's tough because Morales has been out for about a year. He just turned 24 in the last week, and if you watch him fight outside of the UFC, a really good kick, a really good jab, really good offensive takedowns, and then you crystallize it to the two UFC fights, and they're both finishes and they're both great. Not throwing the jab, winging his hands out there, going for kind of offset takedowns and not getting them. He got taken down by Trevin Giles. He was losing that fight until he kind of swings a shot that hits in tight against Giles, puts him on Beach Street, and then he just follows it up with a crazy blitz and drops Giles again against Adam Fugate. Close first round, close second round, third round he drops Fugate and drops him again and gets the win. For Micheal Morales, I've almost seen a regression of the skills, even though he's won these two fights. If you don't watch them, then it doesn't make sense what I'm saying. But Morales hasn't really shown us the fundamentals, and I wonder if over the last year he's just kind of honed in on them. I hope he has.
I think he's 24. I just think he's a young guy who does have a very high ceiling. So when we don't get the very highest version of it, it does leave a little bit to be desired. And you're right. I was so high on this guy coming into the UFC because he has the very crisp striking from the outside. He can throw a straight shot and a looping shot. And when he resorts to a lot of those looping shots, it leaves the door open for Max Griffin to start landing some of those counters. Because the thing about Griffin that I think does help him maintain some of that chin is he does move his head on the inside now. He doesn't always do it. That's the thing about Griffin. On the outside, I do worry about him. The kicks have been a bit of an issue, and you bring it up. It's not something offensively he throws a lot in his game. So if he comes up against an opponent who can maintain that range and really implement their own kicks, Griffin, not that he gets stationary because he is a very high volume fighter no matter what, but it makes it that much more difficult for him not only to land the jab, but the power shot that he can follow it up with.
And we had a fight like this last weekend at welterweight. You talk about common opponents. I mean, the Neil Magny fight against Phil Rowe. Phil Rowe, long rangey, but fights in tight. Neil Magny, long rangey, normally fights at range, but when they both collided and went into the clinch, it was Magny ended up winning a lot of those circumstances. So you look at a fight like this, Morales, one of the bigger guys you're going to find at welterweight, a lot more tattoos since last year.
Griffin's not a small guy, though, for the weight class.
And Griffin's a dense fella at 5'11", even though that's not a short fighter by any stretch of the imagination. At welterweight, Morales is heavily favored in the fight, albeit it seems like Max Griffin is a perennial underdog in his matchups. We have a look at the Tapology votes. The fans like Morales. I'm going to say over under 85% Morales in this one.
I want to say under, but it's probably over.
Yeah, slightly over. 813 total votes, 88% Morales, 24% by decision, 67% by knockout. For the 12% that have Griffin, 68% by decision, 24% by knockout. And Morales, if he can't get through that guard of Max Griffin, who keeps his body out of distance, and if Morales can't land the kicks because Griffin's able to check him, it could be a tough night out.
I just worry about him landing that big shot and if Griffin can recover afterwards. I know he has been able to, but at 37, with this many times of him getting wobbled, I do worry about him. And maybe I've canned Max Griffin out too many times at this point, but I do think this is a very winnable fight for Micheal Morales. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if Max Griffin's the guy who kind of not derails the hype train, but really teaches him a lesson. And this could be one of those fights where Roosevelt Roberts lost to Jim Miller, and I thought it was going to be the best thing ever for him, right? You lose to a guy like that, then you go and rebuild. This could be one of those fights where Morales loses and he becomes a better fighter because of it.
Roosevelt Roberts, ultimate fighter winner. I mean, that guy's going to go great places, Matt, in the matchup. Both of us going with Micheal Morales. I think the wrestling edge can carry him, but Max Griffin's shown really good wrestling defense in the UFC. He can pour it on you offensively. And if you want to see a great Max Griffin fight where he continues to build as it goes on, his fight against Ramiz Brahimaj, the elbows to that ear were disgusting. So go back and watch some tape on these two guys. Both of us going with Ecuador's Morales to get the win. Now it's time for that big-time co-main event. Ismagulov taking on Dawson. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.